Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Creating a Customer-Centric Approach for Mobile Optimization, featuring Maxymiser's expert, Tim Burge. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speaker and go over a few housekeeping items. Tim Burge has been with Maxymiser for 4 years as the head of UK Solution Consulting. He acts to ensure that Maxymiser's leading-edge customer experience optimization solutions, incorporating multivariate testing, segmentation, and personalization, are deployed as strategic tools that put the customer at the center of operations and drive online performance and revenue growth. Tim also helps to drive the next evolution in online customer experience optimization. We encourage everyone to socialize with us during the webinar. Maxymiser's Twitter handle is @Maxymiser, and you can use the hashtag #MaxLessons to share what you learned today. Please feel free to send all questions you have through the control panel in GoToWebinar or on Twitter, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. We'll also be launching a few poll questions during Q&A, and we ask that you please take a moment to answer each question as they pop up on the screen. Okay, take it away, Tim.
Thanks, Anna. So hi everyone, I'm Tim. I'm actually in London today in what is turning out to be a gloriously sunny evening here, so I'm going to use that as my apology for any poor network connectivity or dropouts you might have on the voice here, so hopefully it's all going to go to plan. So in terms of the webinar today, I'm just going to go through a bit of an introduction to what we see as a kind of current state of mobile and some observations on the market. Also looking at some of the things that we see as Maxymiser and working with our mobile clients and some of the things that we see going on out there. And then we'll move on to some practical advice on how to build a customer-centric strategy for mobile and optimization. And then I'll finish up with some customer examples of some work that we've been doing with some of the people that we work with. Now, before we get started though, I think it's worthwhile just spending a couple of minutes introducing Maxymiser, telling you a bit about who we are and what we do. So Maxymiser, we 2006, and in that time, we've always focused completely on customer experience optimization. You know, we don't do anything else there. So for the last 8 years, all we've been doing is helping people optimize the experience they deliver to their web visitors and to those customers that they have online. We work in pretty much every sector. Today, obviously, we're talking about mobile and apps. Everyone has some kind of mobile presence or some kind of app presence these days. That was led very heavily by the gaming sector, so we have a lot of experience in working with those guys over the years as well, which has helped to drive some of that experience in other areas. And today we've got to the point where we have over 300 really iconic brand customers who are using Maxymiser both as a technology and as a service to help them deliver what is an optimized experience to their web visitors. And I think one of the things that's made us so successful over the years, and you can see the list of awards on the page there, but it's our constant investment in R&D and our history of innovation, I think, which has really kept us ahead of the curve on this. And if you look at the way that we've grown as a business, since we really started in 2006 just by setting the standard for optimization and setting the standard for what multivariate testing really should be, and starting off in the UK and then expanding out into the US and Germany and France, and basically adopting the same approach in all of those areas, just helping our clients to deliver a better experience to their customers to allow them to get more revenue from their online channels, which is essentially what it's all about. And as you can see from the timeline here as well, I mean, mobile web has come in quite late into the game here, and it's, I can remember people talking about 2010 being the year of the mobile, and every year since then has been the year of the mobile. I think now we are at the point where that's genuinely true, but it's not just the fact that we launched our mobile web product in 2012, it's all the experience we have prior to that which really helps us to drive not just the technology but also the best practice and advice and guidance that we're able to give around that to the people that we work with. So I just want to start by looking at state of mobile today and what do we see out there in the world. And I think I'll just start by a little quote from Forrester. So this is from 2014, but this is very relevant today as well, I think, is that it says here, most enterprises, your customers are more advanced in their use of mobile technology than your mobile apps acknowledge. So maybe what you could take away from that is that we're not really delivering what our customers are expecting in terms of apps. And certainly the second sentence there, your customers' expectations are higher than you can achieve and are evolving faster than you can move, which really means that there's such a rapid pace of change out there. Technology is being adopted so quickly by so many different groups of people now that as an organization, it is genuinely difficult to keep up with that and to keep up with the expectations. I mean, the advent of tablets has changed the market significantly, and it's now made the experience even harder to deliver because now we've got a lot of mixed media platforms and different experiences for different people. And the final comment there that says, this is true unless you're a mobile leader with agile development teams in place. And I think one of the things we want to talk about as we go through the webinar today is how you can have that agile development team in place, or how you can be more agile with your mobile development to really help you to meet your customer expectation. Whether we're talking about web or app, that's really what today is all about. It's helping you to keep pace with customer expectation and deliver a service that people actually want and can use. Just taking another look at some research here, and again, this is from 2014, but I think it's still relevant again. Looking at the stats on here, this is quite a bad place to be. 96% of people unable to complete what they wanted to do on their mobile device. 91% of people have used a better mobile website from a competitor instead. So, I mean, if that's you, that's a disaster that people are moving so quickly to a competitor's website. 96% of people said sites were too slow. Now those three things, you could look at that and you could say, well, maybe that's just a function of the fact that these guys are on a cell phone, on a cellular network, and it's not really my fault that the cell connection is bad or the reception is poor and the experience is slow because of that. But you can't really use that as an excuse. That's just a fact with these kind of devices. And there will always be a case where it is the device or the network that's introducing additional latency or slow page times into the process. So rather than using that as an excuse, as I said, we have to learn to deal with that, and we have to optimize around that to make sure that that's not a problem. Now, the other two things on this over here, about 95% of people said it was too difficult to enter information or too difficult to find what they're looking for. That is absolutely our problem. That is nothing whatsoever to do with the device or the cell phone network. That is the website or the experience that we're delivering, whether it's web or app, that obviously isn't meeting the expectations that people want from that. So that's really what we need to do, is to figure out how to fix these things. And if we look at what we see from a Maxymiser world in a client survey that we did recently, it really matches up with that to say that people are really looking for is an experience which is as rich and as fast as a desktop, but they're expecting to see that on a small format device or on a tablet. And the fact that we say here 60% of people have accessing a mobile site, and 75% of people talk about load time as being the most important thing, that will be because they've had a bad experience somewhere. So this is really all about accessibility, and it's about performance, and it's about making sure that you can deliver a service to people that allows them to do what they need to do in the right time frame. I mean, in less than a minute it says here, but I think it depends on what sector you're in as to exactly what that time frame is, but it is something we need to think about. How can we provide people with a service that they want to use that gives them that service in a time frame which is acceptable to them? So how do you do that? Or how do you make sure that you start solving these problems and don't fall into these traps? And this is really where optimization comes into this. So, we optimize in order to get rid of these problems. And from a Maxymiser perspective, what we see is there are really three critical to any customer optimization program. And at this stage, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about mobile or apps or whether we're talking about desktop. These are key things that we need to have in place in order to be successful here. So you've got to have insight. You've got to be able to understand what your customers or what your visitors are currently doing on these devices. What kind of behavior are we seeing? What can we learn from the data to tell us about what is working and what's not working for them? So really getting an understanding of behavior based on data. And then testing is an important part of this. So once we've got that idea of insight and behavior, we then need a testing platform to allow us to try out different experiences to try and solve that problem for that person. With testing, whether it's A/B or multivariate testing, we're still trying different user experiences out. We're collecting data, which is giving us more insight, and it's that insight into user behavior again, which then allows us to drive personalization, which is providing people with more relevant, more targeted content, which allows them to complete the task that they're trying to do at this point in time. Now, these three things, none of these are new. We've been talking about personalization for a long time. We've been talking about testing for a long time, and insight is certainly not a new discipline. I think the thinking here, though, is that rather than going for a best of breed, you really have to have, those three things have to be on the same platform in order to do this properly. We don't need to learn three different tools. We don't need to have all the integration and data plumbing and everything behind the scenes to make these things work together. We need one platform which provides us with all those services. A couple of other things we need to think about in this too. We need to think about channels. So by channels here, I mean desktop, tablet, mobile, any kind of or native apps, any inbound experience here. What people are really looking for now is an overall brand experience. They don't really care about the device they're accessing your services on. They just think about you as a brand. So whatever we do has to be across all of those channels. And we also need to be able to integrate with everything else that goes on in that environment. So if there are analytics inside an app or inside a mobile website, we need to make sure that we're connected to that and talking to that, so we can use it as a data source, or we can push data to it to let it know what we're doing. And it's through that integration layer that we might get access to some more data, which gives us more insight, which allows us to then be more personalized or more relevant with the content we're serving. But all of those things need to be on a unified platform. They all have to be being driven by the same engine underneath. And that engine, because we've already talked about the fact that performance is key here, and part of that performance is caused by the fact that cellular networks are not as reliable perhaps as Wi-Fi broadband connections, we need to have a platform that is certainly not going to make that problem worse. So we have to have something that's highly performant here, that delivers content into users' experiences in a way that's not going to impact page load times or not going to make that performance any worse. It's also got to be secure, because we're testing on potentially pages with secure information on, so we certainly can't be collecting any personally identifiable data or allowing data to leak out of the organization. So that platform underneath that unified optimization platform has got to be fast, it's got to be secure, and it's got to be scalable, and it's got to meet the needs of these mobile visitors that you have arriving at your website who are now starting to use that as their predominant channel. Now that sounds like a lot if you think of all of those things together, and I think most people have sort of aspirations to be more at the strategic end of this diagram, but experience shows me that most people are not quite ready to be there yet. Most people will start out a lot lower down this curve, maybe towards the more tactical end of this, where mobile is considered still to be a new channel by some people, or it's still a siloed team. So maybe you haven't done any optimization or testing on your mobile channels or on your mobile apps yet. So you might be starting out at that kind of ABN simple MVT space on the curve here. But that's still important to have the right platform to grow with. So even if you're starting out with a simple testing, you've still got to have the capability to move further up that curve without having to go through a whole vendor selection process all over again. You need a platform which is going to grow with you and allow you to start wherever you need to start on that curve, and then grow right up to the top to make sure that you are delivering this sort of multi-channel optimized experience across all of those devices that people are interacting with your brand through. So just going to take a step back for a second now and say, well, why are we doing this? I mean, we're all on this call because we were interested in finding out about how we can make the mobile experience better, or how we can optimize apps to make people use them more. But let's just take a minute to think about, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of optimization? And there are three things that we need to think about really here, and this translates to pretty much every industry. So first of all, we're trying to get a larger percentage of visitors to transact. and that could be making a purchase, if we're talking a retail world, or booking a flight, or booking a hotel, or if this is a media environment, transact could just be to view content or consume things or download from the site. So it's getting a larger percentage of people to do something. It's getting those people to do that more often. So this is about building loyalty. It's about getting people to come back, making sure that there's not a one-time transaction that people struggle through, but just because it becomes a challenge, but then they'll never use you ever again. So we've got to make the experience compelling and easy so that people come back. And then it's about maximizing the value we get from those transactions. So again, if that's a retail, that might be upsell and cross-sell. If that's travel, hotels, it might be ancillaries. If it's media, it might be getting people to consume more content per visit, or more ad revenue from the ad placements on the site. It's those three things together that we need to do to get the maximum revenue growth out of it. And if you look out there in the world, I mean, there are some people that do this very well, and there are some people that don't do this quite so well. I mean, I use Amazon as an example. Amazon do this fantastically. Their site is very easy to use, and I will buy things from Amazon on my mobile phone that I didn't even know I needed, really. It's that sometimes they're impulse decisions, and I will use Amazon, even though I might be able to get it cheaper somewhere else, because it's easy. They make it simple for me to do this. It's really simple for me to buy something. It's really simple for me to come back again and buy something else to go with it. And they do try and maximize the value of the. So if Amazon can do this, why can't everyone else? Why aren't there more sites out there like Amazon? And why do we have all statistics of websites being difficult to use and the performance people not meeting expectations? And I think one of the fundamental things is quite often we are too close to our own business to really know what it is that our customers are looking for. So my first optimization fact, you are not your own customer. And I think this is particularly true for people who are building mobile sites or building apps, or people who are working in a highly regulated kind of space, where you know your own business and you know your own product so well that you use terminology and you use language which maybe doesn't make sense to people who don't know your industry very well. Or if we're looking at maybe mobile apps, mobile apps tend to be built by people who are maybe in a different demographic to your customers, and maybe they make assumptions about how familiar people are with technology or how people will interact with the device. And so that's the sort of fundamental principle of optimization here, is that we need to get into this mindset that the best people to tell us how we should design our website and our apps are our customers. And if I just use an example here, so this one is from a couple of years ago, but I think the core message here is still relevant. So Matalan is a UK-based organization. They have a physical store presence and they have an online, and they have a mobile website, as you can see here. Now, the two things they were looking at here were what we call the burger button up the top here, which I guess in 2012 for the people who are accessing the Matalan site, perhaps not overly technical people, maybe quite new to this sort of world. Does everyone know what that means? And I think one of the things we think about, or one of the things we need to think about with mobile optimization, is that you don't get any visual clues like you do on a desktop. The mouse pointer doesn't change shape when you hover over something that's clickable. You just have to put your finger on it and press it and see what happens. So that's one of the things we looked at with them, is could we make it simpler for people just by putting some words up there to explain what that did rather than using iconography. So I think now pretty much everyone knows what that three-line thing means because it appears on lots of different pieces of technology. But the messaging here is, don't make assumptions that your visitors know what that means. If you're going to use icons for shortcuts, make sure that people know what they are and that it's clear what the purpose of that is, and it's clear that they are a button and something you can click on. The other thing we looked at here as well is the entry point into the site, and is this the right place to bring people into the site, and is this the right way to present something on a slow device? Is rich imagery or lots of complex images on here the right way to do this, given that that could create a very slow experience of trying to download all that content? So we tried a couple of things with these guys. One was simplifying the navigation completely and taking all the images out and just putting category headings like that. The second thing we tried was a simplified set of navigation. So the original page, if you can see there, goes to men's suits, whereas the one in the middle just goes to men's. So we're looking at taking people to a different level in the hierarchy rather than taking them down to a particular subset. We're just providing a high-level navigation route. So looking at those changes together, what we saw was that simple changes, like using words instead of images here, actually had a very positive impact on the way people were using that. And using that simplified navigation without images also gave us a great that's a pretty significant uplift for a mobile website. But we also found that combination of those things with the images gave us an even greater increase in sales. So we're looking here at the interplay and the interaction between all these different things, and it's by sort of taking a step back and saying, does this make sense to everyone out there? Is this really naturally the way that people are going to want to use this application on this device? And is there a better way of making it simple and explaining the use? So I think we need to keep that in mind. You are not your own customer is a good place to start with this. Now, once we've got some ideas then about this, about how things we can look at, we've got to start by this principle of data and say, well, where are we going to start optimizing? How do I know where to start? Is that navigation on the home page really the best place, or should I be looking somewhere else? Things we need to think about here really are, where is the get ROI from mobile web or apps? Are there any segments of people in there that we should be treating differently, and do we need to create content for those segments? And finally, how can I discover all of this without lots of complex or manual data mining to really to understand the data? I don't want to have an army of data scientists. I want to have tools that help me to do this. And so this brings me to my second optimization fact, that without data, you are just another person with an opinion. And this is really the other fundamental piece of optimization here, is that we really need to get the insight into what people are doing on the site to know what we should be personalizing. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there isn't place for gut feel in this. The data, essentially what the data is going to tell you is it's going to tell you what's happening on the site, probably going to tell you what's not working. You've still got to figure out how you're going to fix that problem and how you're going to make that work. So we can do some analysis on behavior, we can do some analysis on clustering and segmentation and find out if there are groups of people that the experience is not working for. At that point, we've got to come up with some ideas as to how we're going to fix that. So opinion, gut feel is very valid here. That Matalan test that we looked at before, in coming up with those test ideas, someone will have had an idea that simplifying the navigation will have changed the experience. It's then a matter of making sure that you measure that scientifically after that to make sure that that does actually make a difference. So we've really got two kinds of analysis going on here. There's the pre-test or pre-optimization analysis to make sure that we understand user behavior and know where to start. And then once we've done some optimization, then we need to make sure that we measure and analyze that to make sure that A, to make sure that it's working, and B, to make sure that we know why it's working and what the rules are behind that. And that will really help to get around that kind of gut feel instinct kind of thing. If you can prove that it does or does not make a difference, then that gives you a good grounding for moving forward. And so in terms of mobile specifically, we're looking at also what are people using your mobile website for? I mean, it's a good question. If you've got a website which is basically a replica of a desktop site that's now on a tablet or on a mobile, are people really doing all the same things on both of those devices? And if I use sort of hotels as an example, so when people are booking a hotel, maybe there's two reasons for booking. One is that I'm booking a vacation for my family, and the other one is that I'm booking a business trip. So it may be that as a business traveler, I'm much more likely to book hotels on a mobile app or on a mobile website than I am if I'm trying to book a vacation. If I'm booking a vacation for my family, it's likely to be something that I do at home with my family, and I'm more likely to do that on a desktop. So, but how would I know whether that person on that website is a business traveler or a family booking a vacation. And so this is where we need to figure out how we can identify that behavior and what data do you need to be able to identify that. So the example there, I think, of booking a hotel is if in the search widget I put in 2 adults and 2 children for a 2-week period, that's probably a vacation, whereas if I'm a single adult for a 1-night stay in a hotel near an airport, that's possibly a business trip. So we can maybe identify those different users or those different use cases, because after all this might be the same person. We can identify what mode of behavior I'm currently in by looking at the data as I interact with the site. And then we can use that knowledge then to start to test. So once I've figured out that there are different classes of people, what do? Maybe I offer the business traveler a different experience. I try and sell different ancillaries. I'm interested in express checkout and a business class room, whereas as a family, I'm probably interested in a different set of products. So it's about figuring out what we're going to target those people with, using the data that we've got to segment them into different groups, and then ultimately, targeting those users for that particular task they're trying to perform. Now, if we just take a look very briefly now at what we see actual clients doing with Maxymiser in the real world behind their websites. And so some of the things we see are that most people are doing funnel optimization. So we're not necessarily thinking of just sort of homepage optimization or landing page. Most of this is about understanding that this is a process that people are going through and there's a journey, and we need to make sure that we're optimizing the whole journey, not just thinking of the site in terms of pages or thinking of the app in terms of static sections. Also, everything we do gathers insight in some way that is a starting point for the next phase or for future optimization. So it is about testing, taking the data from testing and then using that to refine what you do next. And it's also about tracking multiple KPIs. I think this is the other thing that people tend to forget about optimization, is that the world is not just about conversion rate. Sometimes we have to find a balance between several different KPIs, and maybe revenue is a good example of that one. So what we want to do is larger number of lower value customers by accident. We want to make sure that we're tracking both conversion rate and revenue to make sure that both of those are heading in the right direction. So everything we do is about tracking all of the KPIs and metrics to make sure that we can measure the whole experience. We can also see that everyone is running personalization of some shape or form on a site, whether that's based on geolocation or whether that's based on device or language or CRM data. There's some degree of personalization happening. And that personalization is also happening on multiple places on the site. So we're talking about having personalized content delivered into different places in a mobile checkout process. And really what that's doing is that's combining personalization with multivariate testing, which I know sounds like quite a kind of difficult concept, but that's just about understanding that there's an interaction between the content we're serving and the steps in the journey, and using multivariate testing as a way of measuring all the interactions between all those different steps to make sure that at the end of the day we get the data to be able to understand how people are behaving and which one of those processes is the right one to serve to which segment of people. When it comes to apps, though, things are slightly different with apps. And I think what we see with apps is a lot of people looking at how to optimize the first experience. So I think there's a big issue with some apps is the take-up rate. So we see sort of thousands of downloads from the App Store, but we only see registrations are only in the hundreds and not what we'd expect to see. And so if you've got the kind of app that the first time you run it takes you through a registration process or takes you through some sort of setup process, then that's an obvious place to optimize to make sure that people can easily get through that setup and registration phase to encourage them to then actually use the app. What we don't want is people just downloading it, abandoning it, giving up, never touching again, because that's a waste of the development effort you put into that. So we see a lot of testing going on there. We do, however, see people also testing funnel pages and journeys inside apps. And in particular, we look at people measuring the call to actions and the KPIs around device-specific interactions. So if you've got two versions of the app, maybe one's an iOS and one's an Android version, looking at using specific controls for specific devices that are in keeping with the theme of the OS, so that we can understand, what difference does that make, and are we building an app which are easy for people to use and fits in with their current experiences. Okay, so armed with all of that, now we can think about how we go about building a strategy or a customer-centric strategy for optimizing for mobile. And the place to start here is to think about what we call visitor mode. So in principle, buying something online or booking a hotel or booking a flight or consuming media is not a linear process, really. There are definitely stages that people go through. I mean, I've got browsing, researching, buying, and then sort of social sharing after the event here, which maybe is relevant for travel. But everyone has that kind of journey that people go through. And what we see now is that that journey is not really happening on a single device. That's spread across multiple devices through multiple interactions, and also, in multiple places. So I'm on the bus on my way to work, and I'm on my iPhone, and I'm reading my emails, and I'm clicking on the links, and I'm ending up on a website on the Safari browser on my iPhone. Maybe then I pick that up in the office, and then I'm on my laptop, and I look up some more information there. Then later on after work, I'm in a bar showing that to friends, or I'm at home on my iPad, kind of booking that or buying that product. Now, as a user of that service, I don't really think about the fact that I'm now on the mobile, I'm now on the desktop, I'm now on my iPad. I just think about it in terms of I am interacting with your brand, and I'm just using whatever device is convenient for me at that time. So for me, it's a single brand experience which is spread across those multiple devices. So that's the key here, and it's understanding that I don't necessarily do all things on all devices either. So I'm not necessarily going to want to do all the same tasks on my mobile as I'm going to want to do on that laptop there. And that really ties into themes. So within each of those modes, so the browsing, the researching, the buying, there are various themes which I need to have in place which help me to do that. So, when I'm searching for a holiday and I'm looking for doing research and looking for inspiration, what I really want to have there is an easy-to-use search and selection process. I want the research bit there. I need some guidance there. Trust and confidence is maybe not relevant at that point. Maybe that's more relevant when I'm actually buying and I'm about to put my credit card information in. I want to make sure that that I trust the website and I feel comfortable doing that. And then ongoing after I've made my purchase, it's about account management, it's about loyalty. Now, these are just example themes. Different industries have different themes. There might be some which are relevant to you on here, and there might be some other ones that you can think of. But it's really about thinking of the world in terms of those modes and those themes and how they join together and which one of these themes is applicable to which device or which mode somebody is in. So just taking this one as an example, how well does my site build trust and confidence in my visitors? Well, that might be through clear pricing. It might be how the brand is positioned. If there are any hidden charges like taxes or anything around the maybe flight or hotel or products, it's a clarity of that. Payment, cancellation, return information, all that stuff needs to be clear. And if that's all clearly presented to me, that will help me build that trust. And so that's what we're really thinking of in terms of the theme here, is what kind of things do I need to provide the visitor in order for them to feel comfortable with that part of the interaction in whichever mode they happen to be in at that time. Now, not all things, as I said, are applicable across all devices. So account management, probably an example of that one. If it's a complex account management process, am I really going to do that on my mobile phone, or is that something that I'm going to do on my desktop when I'm at home? So, do I need to provide all these services on all devices? It probably depends on what sector you're in and what business you're in as to which, whether that's applicable or not. But some people will have to provide all services across all devices, and some people can focus on providing, a subset of services on devices. And that really, again, is something you need to think about when you're building an optimization strategy. Is maybe the focus is different on different channels. Maybe the focus for an app is different to the focus on mobile. Different implications on different devices. So search and selection going to be different on a tablet probably to on a mobile. Guidance very similar. And also, we bring responsive into this as well. So if you have a responsive design website, different layouts, do you have to provide the same functionality across all layouts? If you do, is it always built in the same way, or is it always the same optimization that you need to do in every case? So all things to think about when you're coming up with a strategy. Now what you'll find once you've been through this is you'll have then a big long list of things that you'd like to do, and maybe you already have a list of things that you'd like to do. And several key questions we need to ask are, first of all, a very obvious one, is this worth doing? So I've got 3 things on my list here, but you can probably think of some others. Is there enough traffic volume to test effectively? This is a big question with mobile. It's perhaps not the same as desktop traffic for some people. You don't have the luxury of that many visitors, particularly in apps. We probably don't have the luxury of a huge amount of app traffic. So can we effectively test in that environment, or can you effectively test your idea in that environment? So we need to think about that. And linked to the second question, is there enough value there to generate ROI? So if you did manage to improve conversion or increase the number of visitors going through a process, is there enough ROI in that to sort of doing that in the first place? And I think the third really big question here as well, specifically when we're talking about mobile, is are you actually generating any new ROI, or are you just reallocating existing ROI? And that's a big question. So if you've got a mobile website where people are struggling at the checkout, going to a desktop site and buying it on the desktop, if you optimize your mobile site to make it easier for people to buy on the mobile, are you just stealing revenue from your desktop site, or are you genuinely creating new revenue for the business? So what we need to think about here is the context that this sits in, and not just think about mobile as a silo. We've got to think of it in terms of that whole online presence and measure effectively across that domain so that we can make sure that we're not just reallocating people and moving them from one channel to another. Can you build it? That's a key question here. So one of the things we think about when we're testing is if we come up with some great ideas to change the user experience, it's probably very easy to build them in a testing tool, but could you actually build that on your platform if we found a winner? Something to think about. Make sure the development team can actually deliver what you're testing. Will it clash with anything else? So again, nothing new here. This is something that you'd have to think about if you were doing any desktop optimization, is what else is going on the site? Is it going to clash with anything else? Internal politics, is there anything stopping me from testing, or anything I have to do first? And what I mean by that is sometimes you have to earn trust with these environments, and mobile particularly, I think, is that it's easy to see that there's lots of optimization to be made on a mobile website, but sometimes there are internal challenges around testing, maybe in sensitive areas of a site. And one thing you might need to do is start somewhere simple and sort of earn some credibility and prove that this technology works before you can move on to the areas you'd really like to test. So prioritization might be based on that need to prove value first of all, rather than going for your favorite optimization project right up front. And then you've got to think about who's going to do it, which again is an interesting one, particularly if we're talking about apps. Now, if you build your own apps, or you have your own in-house development team that builds apps, then maybe that's slightly more straightforward than if your app is built by an agency. It's something you have to think about, is what would happen if you found a fantastic new process for your app? How would that get built into it, and who's going to do that as well? Is that going to be you or your agency or Maxymiser, or are we going to do that work for you? Now, when it comes to actually implementing these, I think we see 3 different kinds of environment that we're working in. So the first one is traditional mobile web. So this is, by mobile here, I'm really thinking about any specific format of a website which is on a handheld device or on a tablet. So it's very similar to traditional web testing. It's usually HTML. It's you've either got a dedicated site or you've got a responsive or adaptive site. But we've got some extra concerns that we need to think about. We've got to think about the fact that this isn't going to be a high-performance device. This potentially could be a slow browser on a slow network connection, so it's browser performance, it's connection speed. And UI limitations. I think it's easy to forget that if you come from a world where you're testing on desktop, everybody has a keyboard and a mouse, and everybody has a screen of a certain resolution, and you can pretty much assume that most people are on a high-speed broadband connection. Mobile's not like that. You don't have the luxury of a pointing device that changes shape to give you visual clues. You don't have the luxury of a separate keyboard. When the keyboard comes up, it takes up half your screen. So there's UI issues around using that kind of that sort of interface that you need to think about when we're going to start building and implementing testing. Physically, how this works, and this is a JavaScript integration we're talking about here, just like standard web methodologies. The difference, I guess, between standard desktop testing and mobile testing is the QA process that you have to go through. It's very easy to do QA if you've got a big screen. If you're on an iPhone, it's slightly more challenging, so you need to have a specialist set of QA tools to allow you to do that QA testing on a mobile device. And Maxymiser has some on-page tools to allow you to show particular variants on the device to make sure you can preview all the experiences before you go live with it. And I think really though it's, as I say here, mindset rather than technology. It's about thinking about the fact that this is a web device in a different format with some UI limitations maybe, but I don't think we should think of them as limitations. We should think of it as being a different environment that also has some advantages. And I think one of the advantages we might think about are things like a call me button. It's much easier to implement a call me button on a mobile than it is on a desktop because the device has a telephony unit built into it, and you can join people to a call through the click of a button. So there's also some advantages that we can draw on here rather than always thinking of mobile as a kind of poor cousin of desktop. That's not the case. We need to start thinking of the extra things that we can do that we can't do in a desktop environment. So the next category or class of thing is actually native apps. So here I'm talking about something which is, so it's an iOS and Android app. They're written in they're written in Objective-C or Java. Typically they're closed applications and they're compiled for the device. And the issues here are that potentially there's a slow publish process around this. You can't just pump content into an app in the same way that you can into a web browser and alter the experience. If you want to build new functionality into an app, you have to go through an App Store publish. So Apple have got to approve it, and it's got to go out there in the App Store, and then people have got to download new versions of that. Or you've got to get it in Google Play, and they've got, then your users have got to download it from there. So there is additional concerns, I guess, in the process here. We still have the same sort of thing, connection speed. You're still connected potentially over a slow cellular network. The added thing here as well is that sometimes users can be disconnected and not online, so we've got to be able to work in that environment. And we also have the same UI limitations that we would have with web. Here we're talking about, rather than a JavaScript integration, we're talking about a native library which gets built into the application with an application-specific test framework, but it is exactly the same platform underneath this. So when we talked right up front about a unified platform, it is the same Maxymiser platform that's delivering experiences into apps as it is into native web. It's just a different experience that the user sees, or a slightly different technology for integrating with that. So in terms of approach, the overall methodology we're going through is still valid. It can require changes to the app in order to be able to do the testing you want to do, and it may require an App Store publish if you want to start doing advanced testing in your apps. And that's a question that I quite often get asked is, when do I need to do an App Store publish, or what can I do without needing to go through an App Store process? So there are some things that we can do to a native app. So this example here is Sixt, which is a German car rental company. So they have an app, and this is what I'm looking at here. And there are two options when I rent a car with these guys. One is I can pay now when I'm making the booking, or the other one is that I can pay when I pick the car up. Now, they want to test the pay now, pay on arrival things, because the pay now thing is not always valid, either because the corporate rate you're on doesn't allow you to do that, or because it's too close to the pickup point to be able to pay in advance. So they can do some testing here where they're going to take away that pay now button and they're just going to give you one button, which is the pay on arrival price. Now we can do that without needing any App Store publish, because we're just going to use the technology we've embedded in the app to hide that pay now button, and we're going to resize the pay on arrival button to make it fit the screen. So no App Store publish required to do that kind of testing. However, if we want to change the process, so here's a slightly different version of that. Instead of buttons, I've got radio buttons now for pay now, pay on arrival. That's a different user journey I'm now pushing people through. And I can't inject a new user journey into an app in the same way as I can into a website. So in this case, that would need me to build this new functionality into the app. I'd have to go through an App Store publish, and then I'd have to use Maxymiser then effectively as a decisioning engine just to say, show me this version of the page or show that version of the page, and then we collect the statistics. So it does depend on what you're doing as to whether you need an App Store publish, and that might affect the speed with which you can do these kind of things. The third class we see quite often here is hybrid. So this is really a combination of the two. So this is when it's part app, part browser, maybe a native app wrapper around the outside of a browser. And I guess the concerns here are all of the above. It's got the concerns of web and the concerns of app. And in terms of the framework, we can test the native part of the app through the API that we just talked about. We can test the web part through JavaScript integration, just like we would with a website. The challenge with this kind of app, though, is that typically it doesn't have an address bar in the browser because the browser is hidden inside the app. So its QA can be challenging in these kind of environments because there's no way to force variants to be shown by typing anything into the address bar. So Maxymiser has a set of dedicated QA tools which will allow you to test embedded browser functionality inside an app, where we can force test variants to be shown through the platform backend. So again, really thinking about how you can bring all these technologies together to allow you to test everywhere you need to, and to give you the flexibility to be able to work on all parts of the app, whether that's native, hybrid, or whether that's just straightforward web. And all of these things, I know these are pictures of iPhones here, but all of these things will work on a tablet or any other web-enabled device or native app device. So really to sum up on that, so what kind of things do we really need to think about in order to be successful here? Well, be realistic, I think, is the key point here. This is a different kind of environment. You might be lucky to have the traffic volumes and you might not. Particularly on apps, you have to be considerate of the fact that this is a slightly different environment. We maybe can't be as aggressive as we would be on a desktop site, so you've got to think about that. Remember that there is latency and connection implications here. Really think about what it is that people are using this app for, or this website for, and focus on optimizing the important things that gives people the service they need, rather than trying to be too generic. Think mobile. Think about the fact that there are no visual clues in the UI. This is driven by my finger rather than my mouse, and the keyboard is a soft keyboard that obscures the screen and doesn't sit separately. Got to think about all of those things. Above all, you have to plan properly, make sure that you're building an optimization program. You think about all those prioritization issues that I talked about before. Think about which order you need to do things in, and just really have a sort of sensible optimization plan in place, which will allow you to take advantage of the platform. So just to finish off here before we go for questions, I'll just give a couple of examples of some of the things that we've seen people do in the real world. So the first one is cheating a little bit. This is not really mobile optimization as such, but what this is doing is this is trying to get people to download a paid-for app. So Telegraph, an online newspaper in the UK, if you access it on your iPad, it prompts you and tells you that there's an app for this, essentially, but it's a charged, paid-for app. So what they're testing here is they're testing the UI presentation of that. So is it a call out which gets in the way and stops you from accessing anything else, or is it a subtle overlay design? We're looking at the pricing here, so how do you price that, how do you design it, whereabouts should it be on the site. So this is testing about making people aware of think about is awareness when people are accessing the site, particularly if you're about to launch apps or you want to drive more people there. The second one here is about using the features of mobile, and this is, I was talking about this kind of call us or call me button before. So this one here is about understanding that some people need to be or need to convert on a call center and they won't necessarily buy online, and it's really understanding the behavior of the people and knowing who you should present a call us button to, but it's the fact that it can be integrated into the device and integrated into the technology, and you can push someone to an 800 number very easily through the phone, and it's easy to provide that kind of functionality, and that gave a great uplift for them without cannibalizing any of the online purchase that they were seeing on that site. As an example here of understanding about mode, Harry and David here looking at the way people are interacting with a site and what people are doing. So understanding that actually a lot of people are using this for research. They're not necessarily buying through this site. So what we're looking at doing here is drive people through the purchase funnel, but actually telling them where their nearest store is when they're on here as well, so that when they are browsing the site or doing research, we can then try and push them into a physical store if they're not likely to complete the transaction online. So that's using the geolocation on the device and presenting content which helps them to complete that process with the same brand, even though it might not be on the same channel. And my final one here is looking at payment journey process. So this is, again, standard optimization really, in that the process that we're going through here is we're trying to make the experience as easy to use as possible for people and not put any barriers in the way to stop people from doing business with us. So the two different experiences here you can see in this app are, the first one is a first-time buyer who doesn't have an account. So rather than get them to go through the whole process of trying to register on a small format device, we give them the PayPal option to allow them to check out with PayPal, and we can use all the stored data in PayPal to perform the transaction. If somebody is an account holder, then we'll push them through a different process because they're already registered. They don't need to go through all that on the app, so then we can push them through something slightly different. So this is an example now of understanding that the mode is different here because someone's a new first-time visitor or they're a registered visitor. But what we're doing here is we're using this as a way of testing whether these assumptions that these simplified journeys make a difference by measuring the performance of these two versions and seeing whether that does genuinely generate more business for us, or whether maybe using PayPal, which could be quite an expensive option, if that's not generating the ROI, then we don't need to go that route. But we've used testing to verify that and to find out whether that works or not, in this case in an app environment. So that's everything that I was planning to go through there. I think what we'll do now is we'll open up for questions. If anybody's got any questions, as Anna said, if you could put those through the chat panel.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Tim. That was an excellent presentation. So we'll just jump into questions. We only have a few minutes, but if your question is not answered, we will reach out to you afterwards. Okay, how do you deal with optimizing responsive websites where the layout changes dynamically?
Okay, so that's a good question. I see lots of people moving to responsive now, and I think one of the issues with that is that it's not necessarily tied to a device. So you can say that this version of the responsive site only appears on an iPhone, but it's sometimes not as straightforward as that. So one of the things we will do when optimizing a responsive site like that is look at what the breakpoints are for the different viewports on the site. So at what point does the site switch to a different layout? And when we're designing tests, we have to think about is what we're testing applicable to all of those layouts? So maybe if it's changing a call to action, that's valid across everything. Maybe if it's testing a layout, a best layout for a particular viewport, that might only be valid within one viewport. So there are two sides to responsive then. Breakpoints and making sure that those rules are built into the testing, and the other one is thinking about whether or not that's a single viewport test or whether that's valid across everything.
Okay, great. Next question. What happens if we're testing apps and the user is not connected to a network?
Okay, so that's another kind of common occurrence, I think, and it probably depends on what kind of app you have, as not everyone has an app which can work in an offline kind of world. But if you do have that, where people can be disconnected, then one of the things that we will do is when you are online, and you've asked the Maxymiser server for a decision on what content to be shown, that will be stored in a bit of local storage with the app, so that if the user is offline, we can refer to that cached version of the decision, if you like. And then when we're collecting response data from the app, if the person is offline at the point where they're using it, we will store that locally. Next time you come online, or maybe next time you're on a Wi-Fi connection, we will then stream that data back down to Maxymiser so we can collect the analytics in a kind of burst mode afterwards.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more question. Can you really do multivariate testing on mobile sites? Isn't that overly complicated when traffic volumes might be small?
Well, it is something obviously that you need to consider. If you've got small traffic volumes, if you were testing in a desktop environment, you would be having the same conversation. Do I have enough traffic here to use multivariate testing? I think the benefit of using multivariate testing is the additional insight you get into how the changes you're making interact with each other. So I would say that even if you're just considering 4 design changes or 4 versions of a page, if you can do that as a 2x2 MVT, if it can be set up like that, then that will give you more insight into user behavior than trying to do it as an A, B, C, D test. So it's about understanding that MVT is not necessarily just for complicated things. MVT is really just a way of getting more insight into behavior, which will help you to make better decisions going forward.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Tim. That was an excellent presentation. And thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar.